There comes a moment in life when the very people you sacrificed everything for break your heart in ways you never thought possible. My name is Charles, and for most of my life, I believed that family was sacred, that no matter how hard life got, you could count on those you love. I worked long hours, skipped vacations, and put off my own dreams just to make sure my son, Caleb, had everything he needed. Every decision I made, every drop of sweat, was for him. But one day, that belief shattered. It wasn't a dramatic fight, no screaming or yelling. It was worse than that. Cold, calculated words that cut deeper than any knife. "You're a burden," he told me. My own son. The boy I had carried on my shoulders. The boy I had cheered for on rainy soccer fields. And with those words, he kicked me out of the home I had helped build. I stood outside that night, one small bag in my hand, staring up at the house that was no longer mine. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let this break me. Years later, everything changed. Caleb, the son who thought I was useless, came crawling back, broke, desperate, and with nowhere else to turn. And what I did next? Well, it wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was something far more powerful. This is my story. I wasn't born into privilege. My life started in a small two-bedroom house tucked on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. The kind of place where neighbors nodded politely, but mostly kept to themselves. The floors creaked in the winter. The roof leaked when it rained too hard, and the paint peeled from the siding. But it was mine, and I was proud of it. My name is Charles, and for as long as I can remember, I believed in hard work. My father was a factory man. My mother worked as a school secretary. They taught me the value of putting in the hours, of doing what needed to be done, whether it was glamorous or not. By the time I was 17, my hands were already calloused from stacking crates and fixing machinery. Life wasn't easy, but I never complained. When Caleb was born, it was the happiest day of my life. I held that tiny bundle of joy in my arms and swore I would give him a better life than I ever had. And for years, that promise guided me. My days started before sunrise. I'd wake up to the smell of old coffee brewing in my scratched-up coffee pot, slip into my steel-toe boots, and head out the door while most of the world was still asleep. I worked construction by day and did odd jobs by night, painting houses, mowing lawns, even repairing fences for neighbors, just to scrape together a little extra cash. I wasn't perfect, but I tried to be a good father. Every Friday, no matter how tired I was, I'd stop by the dollar store to buy Caleb a little treat. A toy car, a candy bar, something small to let him know I was thinking of him. And on the weekends, I'd be there on the sidelines at his soccer games, cheering until my voice went hoarse. The house was modest, but it was warm and full of love. The walls were lined with Caleb's drawings from school. His soccer trophies sat proudly on the shelf, and the kitchen table was always cluttered with homework and half-finished projects. Caleb was my whole world. Every overtime shift I took, every holiday I spent working instead of resting, it was all for him. I told myself that as long as he had a chance at a better life, my sacrifices were worth it. Even when times got hard, and trust me, there were times when the bank account barely had enough to cover rent, I never let Caleb see me panic. I wanted him to feel safe, to know that no matter how tough life was, his father would take care of him. Over the years, I taught him everything I knew: how to fix a leaky faucet, how to change the oil in a car, how to look someone in the eye and shake their hand firmly. I wanted him to grow up with the same values I was raised with: respect, responsibility, and gratitude. And for a while, I thought I was succeeding. Caleb was bright, ambitious, and full of dreams. When he graduated high school, I was the proudest man in the world. I worked double shifts to help him through college, even sold my truck when tuition bills came in higher than expected. It didn't matter what I had to give up. Watching him walk across that stage in his cap and gown made it all worth it. After college, Caleb got a good job in the city. He started dressing sharper, talking about investments, and moving in circles I could only dream about. I was proud of him, but I also noticed something shift. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits home grew shorter. There was a distance creeping in, one I couldn't quite bridge no matter how hard I tried. But I told myself it was normal. Kids grow up. They build their own lives. That's what I had been working toward all along, right? To give him the freedom to go out into the world and succeed. So I stayed in my little house, kept my routines, and waited for the rare weekends when he'd come home. I'd mow the lawn the day before, fix up his favorite meals, make sure everything looked perfect, hoping he'd feel proud of where he came from. What I didn't know was that the very life I had built for him, the sacrifices I had made, were the very things he had begun to resent. Looking back now, I can see all the little moments that hinted at what was coming. The impatient sighs when I told a story. The way he'd roll his eyes when I wore my old work boots to the diner. The comments about getting with the times. But I ignored them. I wanted to believe my son still saw me as his hero. The setting of my life was simple. A man with a small home, a steady job, and a heart that beat. For one person, his son. And even though the world outside that house kept changing, I held on to one belief. That family was unshakable. I had no idea that belief was about to be tested in a way that would change me forever. The first real cracks in our relationship started. Small, almost invisible. The kind of moments you could brush off if you weren't paying close attention. At first, it was little things. Caleb would call, but his voice sounded rushed, distracted, like I was interrupting something more important. When he came home for visits, he started staying for just a few hours instead of the whole weekend. He'd sit at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone while I tried to make conversation, nodding absently, not really listening. I told myself it was normal. Kids grow up, they get busy. He had a new job, a new life. I should be proud, not bitter. But then came the comments. "You still using that old truck, Dad?" he asked one day, his tone light but with an edge I couldn't quite place. "It runs." "Fine," I said with a shrug. "No reason to replace it." He smirked. "You know there are better ways to live than just scraping by, right?" The words stung more than I expected. I laughed it off, but inside, something shifted. As the months went by, Caleb's visits became less frequent. When he did show up, he was always dressed in sharp suits, wearing a watch that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He'd talk about stock portfolios, luxury condos, networking dinners, a world so different from mine that I often found myself just nodding, feeling out of place in my own kitchen. One Sunday afternoon, I caught him staring around the house with a look that made my stomach turn. It wasn't just disinterest. It was embarrassment. "You know," he said casually, "you could sell this place, move somewhere nicer. Maybe a condo closer to the city? Somewhere less run down." It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Like the home where he'd grown up, where we'd shared Christmas mornings and birthday parties, was something shameful. I tried to laugh it off, to change the subject, but I could feel the gap between us widening. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a cold evening in late autumn when Caleb stopped by unannounced. At first, I was glad. I thought maybe he wanted to spend time with me. But the look on his face told me something else was coming. He didn't even sit down. "Dad," he said, crossing his arms, "we need to talk." The words made my stomach drop. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed, like he was about to deliver bad news to a stranger. "I can't keep doing this anymore. Coming out here, dealing with all of this. The house, the neighborhood, the way you live. It's holding me back." I blinked, not sure I'd heard him right. "Holding you back? Caleb, what are you talking about?" "You don't get it," he said, his voice rising. "I'm building a life for myself, a future. And every time I come here, it's like stepping back in time. It's depressing." I felt my chest tighten. "This is your home," I said quietly. "Where you grew up. Where I raised you." He shook his head. "No. This is your life, Dad. Not mine. And I can't carry it anymore." I stood there in stunned silence as the words hit me like a blow. Then he said it. The words I will never forget. "You're a burden, and I can't let you hold me back any longer. You need to move out. Get your own place. Figure things out. I can't have this in my life anymore." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Move out? This was my house. I'd paid for it, maintained it, built my life here. But Caleb's face was cold, resolute. I opened my mouth to argue, to remind him of everything I had done for him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I felt something inside me break. Packed my bag in silence that night. Just one small suitcase, a few clothes, and a handful of photos. As I zipped it shut, my hands were shaking, not from anger, from heartbreak. When I walked out the door, Caleb didn't even look up from his phone. That was the moment everything changed. Standing on the porch under the pale glow of the porch light, I stared up at the house that had once been filled with laughter, the house I had worked my whole life to keep. And now, it wasn't mine anymore. I could have begged him to let me stay. I could have shouted, slammed the door, demanded he show me respect. But I didn't. Instead, I walked away. That night, as I lay on the hard mattress of a cheap motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, something inside me hardened. I realized that I had spent my entire life giving, sacrificing, and waiting for recognition that was never going to come. I wasn't just losing my home that night. I was losing the illusion that love was enough to keep someone close. And that realization, as painful as it was the start of something new. The first few weeks after Caleb threw me out were the hardest of my life. I found a one-room apartment on the far side of town. The kind of place where the walls were paper-thin, and you could hear your neighbors arguing through the night. The radiator clanged and groaned like it was angry to be working, and the single window overlooked a parking lot littered with beer cans and cigarette butts. I had no furniture except a mattress on the floor and a chair I picked up from a thrift shop. I ate most of my meals out of cans and paper bags. The first night I sat on that mattress with a sandwich from the gas station, I felt hollow. It wasn't just losing the house. It was losing my son. Losing the years of sacrifices that seemed to mean nothing now. I had given him everything I had, and somehow that still wasn't enough. For a while, I let the pain swallow me. I stopped answering phone calls from friends. I stopped going to the diner where I used to spend Sunday mornings. I'd just lie there at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the moments we had shared. The time I stayed up all night helping Caleb build his science project. The way his face lit up when I bought him his first bike. The way he used to run to the door to greet me after work. It was like I was mourning someone who had died. Except he was still out there, living his life, while mine had been turned upside down. But there's only so much lying around a man can do before something in him snaps. One morning, I woke up, looked around at that tiny apartment, and thought, this isn't going to be the end of me. I grabbed a notepad and started writing. Not a letter to Caleb, not some angry rant, but a plan. I wrote down every skill I had. Years of construction work, maintenance jobs, painting, small repairs. I'd been in dozens of houses, seen how neighborhoods rose and fell, seen which homes sold fast and which ones didn't. I knew how to spot a good property when I saw one. That was when the idea first came to me. Real estate. I didn't have much money, but I had enough to take a small risk. I started by helping a landlord fix up a run-down duplex for cheap rent. I painted walls, patched drywall, fixed leaky faucets, and when it was done, I had not only paid for my stay, but made a small profit on top of it. That little win lit a fire in me. Soon, I was offering my services to other landlords, building relationships, learning everything I could about the business. I spent evenings reading articles about buying, selling, flipping. I watched videos online about negotiating deals, about what made properties valuable. For the first time in months, I felt alive again. But don't get me wrong. It wasn't easy. There were nights I came home with my back aching so badly I could barely stand. There were mornings I woke up with blisters on my hands from pulling up floorboards. And there were plenty of days where I doubted myself completely. But every time I felt like giving up, I remembered the look on Caleb's face that night he told me to leave, the coldness in his eyes, the way he acted like I was an anchor dragging him down. And I told myself, I will not be that man he thinks I am. I will not be his burden. Slowly, my efforts started to pay off. I scraped together enough money to put a down payment on a tiny fixer-upper. It was ugly. The roof leaked, the floors were warped, and the place smelled like it had been abandoned for years. But it was mine. I worked day and night, tearing out rotten wood, replacing cabinets, painting until my arms went numb. I watched that house transform from a wreck into something beautiful. When I sold it 6 months later, I made more money than I had seen in years. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about proving to myself that I could still build something from nothing. And with every deal, every house I repaired and sold, I felt my confidence grow. But deep down, there was still that ache. I'd drive past the old house sometimes, the house Caleb now lived in, and I'd see lights on inside. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of him through the window, laughing with friends, living a life that I was no longer a part of. It hurt, but I also noticed something else. The house didn't look the same. The grass wasn't cut as neatly as I used to keep it. The paint on the porch was peeling. It was small, but it told me something. Caleb might have kicked me out, but he wasn't taking care of what I had left behind. And that knowledge gave me strength. I was building something new for myself, piece by piece, brick by brick. And I was determined that when the day came that Caleb needed me, I wouldn't be the same man he had thrown away. I would be stronger. While my life was slowly piecing itself back together, Caleb's was starting to fall apart, though I didn't know it at first. At the beginning, it seemed like he was on top of the world. Social media posts showed him at rooftop parties, luxury dinners, smiling with people in suits and expensive watches. He had the life I used to dream of for him. But over time, those photos stopped appearing. The posts got fewer and farther between. When they did show up, he didn't look quite as happy. His smile a little too forced, his eyes a little too tired. I wasn't following him obsessively. I had too much work to do. But every once, in a while, I'd see something and wonder if everything was as perfect as it seemed. Then I heard from a mutual friend that Caleb had quit his job. He said he was starting his own company. The friend told me over coffee. Something about investments. Big plans, but you know Caleb. He doesn't like listening to advice. I just nodded. I knew that side of him all too well. Months passed, and I kept working, buying and fixing up houses. But whispers kept coming. Back to me. The business wasn't doing well. The investors were pulling out. Caleb had borrowed money from some friends and not paid them back. The first time I saw him after all this, it was purely by chance. I was at the hardware store loading plywood into my truck when I heard someone call my name. It was Caleb. Atrititi. First, I barely recognized him. His suit was rumpled, his hair messy, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Dad," he said, hesitating, almost like he wasn't sure if he should speak to me. "Caleb." My voice was calm, but my heart pounded. We stood there in awkward silence for a few moments. "How have you been?" he asked finally. "Busy," I said simply. He nodded, looking around as if trying to find the right words. "Listen, I was wondering if—" But before he could finish, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, muttered something under his breath, and walked off to take the call. I stood there for a moment, watching him pace angrily outside the store, gesturing wildly with his free hand. Whatever he was dealing with, it wasn't small. That night, lying in bed, I thought about that encounter. Part of me wanted to reach out, to ask if he was okay. But another part of me remembered the night he told me I was a burden. Remembered the silence as I packed my bag, and I stayed quiet. Over the next year, Caleb's downfall became impossible to ignore. His company went under. Lawsuits followed. Angry investors demanding their money back. Clients threatening to sue. He sold. His luxury car, then his expensive watch. The house I once kept so carefully began to fall into disrepair. Neighbors would tell me they saw him coming home late at night, sometimes drunk, sometimes just staring blankly out at the yard for hours. The more he lost, the more I focused on my work. I wasn't being cruel. I just knew I couldn't save him. Not yet. My own business was thriving by then. I owned several rental properties, had a network of contractors working with me, and for the first time in years, I had savings in the bank. But with every success I had, I felt the emotional weight of the past pressing on me. I wanted to forgive him, but forgiveness felt too easy. I wanted him to understand. One night, I got a knock on my door. When I opened it, Caleb was standing there. He looked nothing like the man who had thrown me out. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes red, his clothes wrinkled. "Dad," he said, his voice hoarse. I don't know where else to go." Those words hit me harder than I expected. He stood there waiting, like a man on the edge of a cliff. And for a moment, I just looked at him, remembering everything. The years of sacrifice, the night he shut me out, the months I spent rebuilding my life piece by piece. I didn't say anything, not yet. Because in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about Caleb's downfall. This was about me reclaiming my dignity. And whatever I did next would define not just our relationship, but the man I had become since. That night, I walked out of my own house with one small bag. Caleb stood on my doorstep like a man who'd been stripped of everything. His once confident posture was gone. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tense. I could see the desperation on his face before he even opened his mouth. "Dad." His voice cracked. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't answer right. Away. Part of me wanted to slam the door. Another part of me wanted to grab him and pull him into a hug. Instead, I stepped aside and let him in. He walked into my apartment slowly, glancing around. It wasn't fancy, just a clean, well-kept place with simple furniture. But there was pride in every corner. My tools were neatly organized, the counters spotless, the walls freshly painted. Caleb sat down heavily on the couch, his shoulders slumping. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "What happened?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Everything," he said. "The company went under. I owe more money than I can count. My so-called friends, they disappeared as soon as I couldn't pay for their dinners anymore. And the house," he swallowed hard. "I had to sell it." I felt something twist in my chest. That house had been my pride for decades, but I kept my face calm. "So now you're here," I said quietly. He nodded. I didn't know where else to go. There was a time when those words would have sent me running to fix everything. I would have offered money, advice, anything to take away his pain. But now, I wasn't the same man I had been. I looked at him. Really looked at him. He wasn't the arrogant young man who had thrown me out. He was tired, broken, humbled. "Caleb," I said slowly, "do you remember the night you told me to leave?" He winced, his face flushing with shame. "Yeah," he said softly. "You told me I was a burden," I continued. "You said I was holding you back." "I was wrong," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't understand what I was saying back then. I leaned back, my arms crossed. "No, you understood. You just didn't care." The words hung in the air like smoke. He stared at the floor, his hands twisting together. "I don't know how to fix this," he said finally. "I don't know how to make it right." I let the silence stretch for a moment. I wanted him to sit with that discomfort, to feel the weight of what had happened. "Making it right," I said slowly, "isn't about money. It isn't about fixing the house or repaying debts. It's about respect. It's about loyalty. Things you can't buy." He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You think I don't know that now?" he asked. "I've lost everything. My business, my friends, my reputation. The only person who never gave up on me was the one I threw away." I felt something in me soften. For so long, I had carried the weight of that night. The humiliation, the pain, the betrayal. I had let it fuel me, drive me to rebuild my life. But sitting there, looking at my son, I realized something important. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about growth. For both of us. "Caleb," I said finally, "I'm not the same man you kicked out. I rebuilt my life from nothing. I have my own business now, my own place, my own sense of worth. I don't need saving, and I don't need your apology to survive." He swallowed hard. "Then why let me in?" "Because," I said quietly, "I wanted you to see what a man can do when he refuses to stay broken. I wanted you to see that dignity isn't something someone can take from you. It's something you choose to hold on to." He stared at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, He nodded. "You're right," he said. "I didn't respect you before. I thought success was about money, about image. But I see now. I was wrong. I was selfish. I didn't rush to forgive him. I didn't pretend everything was fine. Instead, I said, if you really mean that, then start proving it. Not to me, to yourself. Get a job. Pay your debts. Learn to stand on your own 2 feet. And when you've done that, then we can talk about what comes next." He nodded again, this time with a determination I hadn't seen in years. As he stood to leave, he hesitated. "Thank you," he said, "for not turning me away." I just nodded. After he left, I stood at the window and watched him walk down the street, his shoulders straighter than when he had arrived. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't about making him suffer. It was about letting him find his own path, just like I had found mine. And in that moment, I realized something else. I wasn't just Caleb's father. I was my own man. The next few weeks felt strangely quiet. After Caleb's visit, I half expected him to disappear again, to fall back into his old habits and ignore everything we'd talked about. But he didn't. Instead, he called. Not every day, not even every week, but every so often I'd see his name light up my phone. At first, the conversations were short and awkward. "Hey, Dad," he'd say, his voice tentative. "I just wanted to let you know I got a job." I kept my reply calm. "That's good. Where?" "Warehouse work. Not glamorous, but it's a start." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. A start is all you need, and it really was a start. Little by little, I began to see changes in him. The next time he came by, his clothes were clean and pressed, his hair cut neatly. He looked tired, but there was a steadiness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I've been working overtime," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck, "trying to get ahead on some of my debts. It's slow going, but I want to do this right." I studied him carefully. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't asking me for money. He was just telling me the truth. That night after he left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the cup of coffee I'd made for him that was still sitting half empty. A part of me wanted to rush in and make it easier for him, to give him the money he needed, to take away the burden. But I knew I couldn't. This was his climb now. Over the next few months, I kept watching from a distance as Caleb slowly pieced his life back together. He picked up a second job, started making payments to the people he owed, and even called me once to ask for advice. Not for money, but advice. "Dad, you've flipped houses before, right?" he asked one evening. "If I can save up a little, do you think it's worth buying something cheap and fixing it up?" I smiled, even though my chest ached. "It's worth it if you're willing to put in the work." And he was. One Saturday morning, I found him standing outside my apartment with a toolbox in hand. "I bought a little place," he said. "It's a wreck, but it's mine. I was hoping maybe you'd come look at it with me. Maybe teach me what to do." I hesitated for a moment, then grabbed my jacket. When we got there, I had to bite back a laugh. The house was in worse shape than my first fixer-upper. The paint was peeling, the floors sagged, and the kitchen smelled like something had died behind the cabinets. But Caleb didn't look defeated. He looked excited. "It's not much," he admitted, "but I want to make it better." For hours, we walked through the house, making a list of everything that needed to be done. New plumbing, patching holes, replacing windows. It felt strange, working alongside him again, like we were building something not just with our hands, but with our relationship. At one point, Caleb paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think all of this, hard work, fixing things yourself, was beneath me. I thought money solved everything." He looked up at me, his expression serious. I was wrong. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I handed him the hammer and said, "Then prove it. Keep going." By the end of the day, we had barely scratched the surface of what needed to be done. But for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt before: hope. When I drove home that evening, my hands were sore, my back ached, but I was smiling. This wasn't just Caleb's redemption, it was our redemption. Weeks turned into months, and with each visit to Caleb's fixer-upper, I saw him transform. Not just the house, but himself. His hands, once soft and uncalloused, were now rough and nicked with small cuts. His shoulders, once slouched under, the weight of pride, now carried the quiet confidence of a man doing honest work. One Saturday afternoon, after a long day of ripping out old carpet and installing new flooring, we sat together on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky, with streaks of gold and crimson. We were both sweaty and exhausted, but for the first time, I could feel the tension between us easing, like the cracks in an old wall finally being patched. Caleb broke the silence first. "Dad," he said softly, staring at the horizon, "I need to say something." I waited. "I know I said sorry before," he continued, "but I don't think I really understood what I was apologizing for until now." He turned toward me, his face earnest. "That night, when I told you to leave, I thought I was doing what was best for me. I thought you were holding me back. But the truth is, I was ashamed. Not of you, but of myself. I didn't want to face how much I owed you, how much of my life you had built with your own two hands. It was easier to push you away than admit. I was scared of never measuring up." His voice cracked. "And when everything fell apart, I realized you were the only person who never stopped working for me, even when I didn't deserve it." For a long moment, I didn't speak. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy. "I hated you for a while," I admitted finally, my voice low. "Not because you hurt me, though you did, but because I let myself believe you were right, that I really was a burden, that I had wasted my life." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just my son, but a man who had been broken and rebuilt. "But I'm not a burden," I said, my voice steadier now. "And neither are you. We both just lost our way." Caleb's eyes glistened. "Do you think we can start over?" The question hung between us like a fragile piece of glass, waiting to shatter. I could have said yes immediately, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "Starting over isn't easy. It means forgiveness, not just from me, but from yourself. It means proving, every day, that you've changed. Can you do that?" He nodded, tears spilling down his face now. "I can. I want to." Without thinking, I reached over and gripped his shoulder. "Then let's keep building. This house, this life, together." And for the first time in years, he smiled. A real smile. That evening, as we finished sweeping the last of the sawdust from the porch, I felt something shift deep inside. Me. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something new. When I drove home that night, the weight I had been carrying for years felt lighter. I had rebuilt my life brick by brick, and now I was rebuilding my relationship with my son in the same way. Slow, steady, intentional. The man who had once thrown me out of my own home was now standing beside me, hammer in hand, learning what it meant to create instead of destroy. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. The months that followed felt like a new season in my life, and in Caleb's. The house that had once been falling apart was slowly becoming a home again. The sagging porch now stood solid with fresh wood and new paint. The kitchen that once smelled of mildew now smelled of fresh sawdust and brewed coffee. Every corner of that house carried a piece of our shared labor, our sweat, and our determination. But it wasn't just the house that was changing, Caleb was changing too. He kept his promise. He worked every spare hour he could, paying down his debts one payment at a time. He called me not just for help with the house, but to talk, really talk, about life, work, and even his regrets. One night, as we were installing new cabinets, he paused and said, "You know, Dad, I used to think success was measured by what you could buy. Cars, clothes, the right friends. But I've never felt prouder than I do right now, with sweat on my shirt and dirt under my nails." I smiled, my chest warm. "That's because this," I said, gesturing around at the walls we had just painted, "is something you built yourself. No one can take that from you." And I realized that was the real heart of this story. For years, I had thought Caleb's rejection had destroyed me, but what it really did was push me to rebuild myself, to find out who I was without the role of provider constantly defining me. It forced me to stand on my own 2 feet, not as Caleb's father, but as Charles, a man who had worth on his own terms. And when Caleb came back to me, broken and humbled, it gave me the chance to teach him that same lesson. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing him for what he had done. It was about showing him and myself that dignity doesn't come from money, titles, or other people's approval. It comes from choosing to get back up when life knocks you down. Over time, Caleb and I found a new rhythm. We shared meals together again, laughed over small mistakes during renovations, and even planned to buy another property together, not as father and son, but as partners. But I was careful too. I didn't let the past disappear completely, because forgetting would mean losing the lessons we had learned the hard way. One evening, as we sat on the front steps of the nearly finished house, Caleb turned to me and said, "Do you think we'll ever get back to the way things used to be?" I shook my head. "No," I said simply. "And that's a good thing." He looked at me, puzzled. "If we went back," I explained, "we'd go back to the same mistakes, the same blind spots. We're not who we used to be. You're not the boy who pushed me away, and I'm not the man who thought his whole worth was tied to being needed. We're better now, stronger." He nodded slowly, as if taking in every word. There was peace in that moment, the kind that comes not from erasing the past, but from facing it and moving forward anyway. As I drove home that night, I thought about everything we had been through. The fights, the heartbreak, the long nights alone wondering if I had failed as a father. And then I thought about where we were now. Caleb had learned humility. I had learned strength. And together, we had learned that love, real love, isn't about control or obligation. It's about standing beside each other even when it hurts. It's about rebuilding, brick by brick, until you have something worth standing on again. And maybe that's what life is really about. Not avoiding the pain, but letting it shape you into someone stronger. The man who had once been treated like trash was now living a life built on respect. For himself, and for the son who had once rejected him. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a man who had survived heartbreak and turned it into purpose. And as for Caleb, he was learning, day by day, that redemption isn't a single moment. It's a choice you make over and over again to do better. When I look back on it all now, I don't see tragedy. I see a story of two men, one older, one younger, who had to lose everything to find what truly mattered. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. Because in the end, I didn't just get my son back, I got myself back. If you've made it this far, take a deep breath with me. Because this wasn't just my story. It's a story about so many of us. A story about sacrifice, heartbreak, and finding the strength to stand up when life knocks you flat. I know some of you watching right now have felt this same pain. Maybe it was your child, your parent, your sibling, someone you loved so deeply who turned their back on you. Maybe you've been in that place where you questioned your worth, where you wondered if you'd ever be respected again. And maybe, just maybe, you've been the one who had to swallow your pride, go back, and ask for forgiveness. So, here's what I want to know. What would you do if the person you sacrificed everything for threw you away, only to come crawling back? Years later? Would you forgive them? Would you make them earn it? Or would you walk away for good? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And your stories are what make this community so powerful. And if this story touched you, if it made you think, made you cry, or even gave you a little hope, please hit that like button. It lets me know these stories matter to you. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because I have more stories just like this, real, raw, and powerful, coming your way every week. Someone out there needs to hear this story today. Share it with them, because sometimes the right story at the right time can change everything.